Hey there internets, I'm Michael and this is Toucan Play That Game, bringing you our video on how to play Quadropolis by Days of Wonder. So, what is Quadropolis? Well, let's look at the box. So, we have some construction workers and some high-rise buildings, some cranes in this city. So, it's a game about building a city with construction workers. And that's actually right for a change. The box does a wonderful job. Yay. So yeah, the game is all about building up your city to have the best city as each mayor's building your own city, competing to have the best one. And how that's dictated is building buildings in certain places of certain numbers, etc. will get you different amounts of points. So at the end of the game, whoever has the most points wins the game. Now, this game actually does feature two different modes of play. They're very similar, but with a few small changes. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to teach you how to play the classic mode, which is the basic mode, and then there's the expert mode, which I'll go through the differences at the end of the video. So let's take it to the table to learn how to play Quadropolis. Welcome to the table for how to play Quadropolis. So let's start with how to set the game up. The first thing you want to do is give each player one of these player mats. Now these have two sides, one listed classic and the other listed as expert. So for this first how to play, we're just going to be talking about this classic. I'll talk about expert later on. They'll also need one of these little player aid sheets here, and again this has a classic side and an expert side, so they'll be using the classic side as we're setting up the classic game, and also they'll need their 4 architects of the matching colour, which is for this one here blue. Then randomly determine your first player and give them the little green mayor token. This will sit in front of them, representing they're the first player. Near the middle of the table, you're going to want to put your red energy tokens and also your blue inhabitant tokens so that all players can reach them. And also you're going to want to put your urbanist out on the table ready for the first turn. Then place your construction zone in the middle of the table. And this is the one with the kind of school desk look on the back and just blank squares on the front. Once you put this out, you'll then need to get the bag that comes with the game, and you'll then need to get your tiles out of your box for your first round. Now, a game of Quadropolis is made up of 4 rounds for classic mode, and each round will involve 4 turns per player. So to sort out which tiles you need to take, the different columns are labelled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is only used in the expert. So the big chunk of tiles, you want to take all of those, drop those in your bag. Then the smaller sections of tiles here, you'll have some labelled expert that are for the expert mode, and you can just leave those in the box. However, you'll also have a small section labelled classic. So take those out, drop those in your bag, shake those up. Now we're just going to populate our construction zone here. So you reach into your bag, you draw out a tile, place it face down, and then move on to the next space, doing the same. Doesn't matter if you see the tile as you're drawing it out, just flip it over. The key thing is that you're not picking where it goes. Until you have the board fully populated, as we do here. Then, depending on the number of players you have, you'll need to remove some of these tiles. So if you're playing with 3 or fewer players, remove any with the 4 on the corner. If you're playing with only 2 players, you'll also need to remove those that state 3.4. That means they're only used in a 3 and a 4 player game, so they're taken out for this 2 player game. Once you've removed all of these off the construction zone, they can then go back in your box. Then turn over each of the buildings to reveal what they are, until they're all revealed like so. This is then the game all set up, and for a 2-player game, your table will look something like this. So let's now talk about how a player's turn will work. Each turn will be made up of 4 parts. The first part will involve taking a building from this construction zone. How this will work is you'll pick one of your available architects, which have a number ranging from 1 to 4 in classic mode, and you will select that architect. You will then choose somewhere around the board to put it so that it points towards either a row or a column. And you can put it so it's along the bottom or upside down on the far right hand side. It does not have to just go on the left or top. Wherever this arrow points to, the number of spaces equal to the number on the architect is the building you will take. So here we have 1 in this direction. We would take this building here, or we could put it here to take this building, here to take this building, here to take this building. If we used a bigger number, we could take a building further inside the board. So for instance, we could place this 3 up here, which allows us to go 1, 2, 3, and take this building here. So let's say we take this building. We then leave our architect there, and that is now blocking that line from anyone else placing an architect in that space, because you can only place an architect in a space that does not already have an architect around the board. Also, after placing your architect, you would then place the urbanist, which is the black little pawn marker here, in the space where you took the building from. Now, as well as the red player not being able to place their architect where you've already placed one, they also cannot place an architect so that it points at this urbanist. So here, this architect points at that urbanist. If it's placed here, it's still pointing at that urbanist, so it's not allowed. Or here, it's placing at that urbanist. But that urbanist will move once the red player placed and took a building, because the second stage of their turn would be move the urbanist to where they took a building from. However, let's carry on with the blue player's turn. As well as your architects affecting where you take your building from in the construction zone, they also affect the next part of a player's turn, which is placing the building in their city. Now, because I used a free architect, I must place this building either in row 3 or column 3 of my city. So I could go there, and that's 3, 3. I could go there. So let's just say I choose to place it there in a 3. Obviously, if I used a 4, I would go in either column 4 or row 4. A 1 would be column 1, row 1, and so on. Additionally, buildings such as your tower blocks can be played on top of existing buildings. Now, I will tell you when we go through the scoring which buildings can be stacked up like this. With these, as well as you being able to place the building based on the column and row number, you could also place it based on the floor number. So if I use this 2 to claim this second tower block, because this would be a second floor being placed on here, as well as being able to place it either in this row or this column, I could still choose to place it on top of this existing one, even though that's in column 3 and row 4. Once you've placed a building in your city, the final part of your turn is to collect any resources it would give you. So, for instance, this tower block here shows in the top left that it gives you 2 occupants. So you would take 2 blue people from the supply. The symbol down the bottom here in the octagon is not something you get, it's a cost for this building, and I'll talk about that when I talk about scoring. So having placed this tower block here, we'd then take 2 occupants that get added to our supply. As well as occupants in the top left, you'll also see these energy symbols, and for each one of those you see, you'll take one of the energy tokens. Additionally, you may also see a blue star with a number and VP in. This means you don't gain that immediately, you'll gain victory points for this tile if it is powered, and I'll talk about that later at the end of the game. Also, in the bottom left of one tile, there is a tower block. In each of the rounds will be a green pawn symbol. If you buy this, you'll take the first player token, and for the next round, you will be the first player. That would then be the end of the blue player's turn, and we'd move on to the red player's turn until every player had used all of their architects, so claimed 4 buildings. Then, to set up the new round, each player would take all of their architects back into their play area. The urbanist would be removed from the construction zone, and any buildings remaining in the construction zone would be removed and returned to the box. Then you would set out your construction zone for round 2 in the exact same way you did for round 1, but using the tiles from the round 2 section of the box. At any point during the game, as you're collecting your resources, your energy and your occupants, you are able to put those on the buildings that require them in order to score. So where it has the symbol in the hexagon here, that means you need to place one there in order for this building to count as scoring. So at the end of the game, once you've played 4 rounds, here we have a 2-player game that's done 4 rounds. You will then have one final opportunity to allocate those resources to the buildings. Now, you don't have to do this as you go along playing. It's just recommended to, so that you can keep track of what you've powered and what you've not. So, for instance, these harbours all require a person on, so we can put one individual person on each harbour. If at this time, once you've gone through allocating your resources to your various buildings, you're unable to power a building with the required resource, you'll simply flip that building over and it counts as not existing for the purpose of this scoring. With powering buildings, it's important to note where you have stacks of tower blocks here, you'll gain the resources each time you claim one of these buildings that each one of them had that you're placing on top of each other. However, the entire stack will only need the one resource in order to power them. So despite each one having one energy as a requirement, when they're stacked on top, you only pay the building on top's requirement. When allocating resources, if you've already allocated a resource to a building, you can move it at a different point in the game, including just before doing your final scoring. Also, it's important to note with parks, they don't give you any resources, but they also don't require a resource to be powered. However, they will allow you to remove one energy that you have as an excess by placing it on the park, because, you know, green stuff eats the pollution or whatnot. So for this blue player here, we can place one of his red energy on that park. The reason you do this is because at the end of the game, when you're doing your final scoring, any of these resources that you have here that have not been allocated to a building are negative points, 1 point lost for each one. So having done our final allocation of our resources, you'll then get your score pad and work through this, working out the score for each player. So to do this will depend on the type of building. So you can tell looking at your player aid how each of the buildings scores. So let's start by discussing the tower blocks here. So these are the yellow buildings, and they score based on how many are in each stack. So the number of tiles in a stack is 1, 2, 3 or 4. And the number of victory points you get is 1, 3, 6 or 10. So let's look at each of these players here and see how many points they'll get. So the red player has a stack of 3, and that is it. So for that one stack of 3, they would get 6 points. And you would write that in the correct column of your score pad. The blue player here has a lot more tower blocks. They have a stack of 4 that is powered, so we'll get them 10 points, plus they have a stack of 3, which is another 6 points, so that takes them to 16 points so far. Then they have 2 single ones. Each of those is only worth a single point, so they'd have 18 points for their tower blocks. Next, let's talk about our parks, which are our green buildings here. Now, the red player didn't buy any parks, but the blue player bought 1 park. The way parks score is for the number of tower blocks adjacent to them. So it's important to note that adjacent is only adjacent, diagonal does not count. So you can only have a maximum of 4 adjacent to a single park. Now, blue here only has the 1 park, and he does have 4 tower blocks. It's important to note that these stacks still only count as a single one for the purpose of determining the scoring. So this would get them 11 points. Next, let's talk about our purple buildings, which is our shops here. So these score based on the number of customers they have inside them. Now, these are the only building where you're able to place spare people inside them, but you can only do this if it is powered. And the number of points you get will be determined by the number of people, up to a maximum of 4 people. So if you have 0 people in your shop, it scores you 0 points. So this red player has 2 shops powered that are giving them no points. However, they have this third shop that has 4 people in, so we'll give them 7 points. Next, we have our orange factories, and these score similar to the parks, based on the buildings that are adjacent to them. However, this time it's not how many buildings are adjacent to them, it's what type of building. So each shop that is powered adjacent to a factory will score 2 points, and each harbour will score 3 points. So if we look at the blue player, he has neither shops nor harbours next to either of his factories, so he'll get no points for his factories. This red player, however, will get a large number of points. So if we look at this factory here, he has 2 shops and 1 harbour, so that's 7 points. This factory is next to 3 shops, so that's another 6 points, that's 13 points now. And then this factory is next to 2 shops and 2 harbours, giving him another 10 points for that. So 23 points for his factories. Next are these bluey-green public service buildings. Now these score in a different way again. This time it's how many different quadrants of your player area contain a public services building. So these are separated by the colours, and we can see that the red player has no public service buildings. However, the blue player does have 4 public service buildings, and they are all in different coloured sections of his city. Therefore, that player would get the full points of 14 for having 4. Obviously, if they'd only had 1, they'd only get 2 victory points. However, on top of that, several of this player's public services have this victory point reward here. So we'd also add this in. So as well as getting 14, he would get another 8 points for his bonus victory points. So that would be 22 points there. The final building in classic mode is our blue harbours here. And the way these score is for how many you have in a row or column. So a single one on its own is not worth any points, but this column of 2, for example, would be 3 points, and this row of 4 would be 12 points. So if we look at our player boards, there are no harbours in the blue city, but in the red city here, we've actually got 2 sets of 4, because we've got a column of 4 down this side, and then along the bottom we have a row of 4. So they would get 24 points for that. Then we would need to subtract for each of the unused resources. So for the red player, they have 7 energy unused, and for the blue player, they have 6 unused occupants and 1 unused energy. So again, -7. And that is everything you need to know for how to play the classic mode. So let's now talk about the differences in expert mode vs classic mode. So firstly, when setting up the game, rather than using your classic side of your player mat, you'll want to be using your expert side. Also, of course, with your player aid, again, you'll use your expert side. Next, rather than giving each player the architects of their colour, instead, you'll flip over those architects and create a central pool of architects. So we have our blues and then our reds here. So you can see they all become uniform grey. And you'll also want to add a 5th architect, because another difference of the expert is that it has 5 rounds and 5 turns each round rather than 4. So the first change to gameplay will be on your turn when you're choosing an architect to be able to claim a building from the construction zone. You'll not be limited to your own pool. You have this pool of all the different architects. So you could take the one on your first turn, and then if the other player took a free, you could take a second one, because you can take any of the different colours, because they're all just grey, they're all doing the same job, and you're literally drafting from what's available. Then there is also a change when you're placing your building because of the change to this player mat. So it's no longer done by rows and columns. Instead, now there are 5 different areas or districts that are used. So if you used a 1, you could play in the 1 district, a 2 in the 2 district, 3 in the 3, 4 in the 4, and 5 in the 5. Or each individual space is numbered and you can place it in the corresponding numbered space for each district. So you could place it in the 1 of the 2 district, etc. The rules for placing tower blocks remain unchanged with regards to you can use the floor number. The final change comes in the form of scoring. So your tower blocks can now go up to 5 in height. Your shops can now have 5 people in them. And because you've got 5 districts now, your public offices can be in 5 different districts rather than only 4. And also, because your board is bigger, you can now have your harbours in lines of 5. As well as that, there are also 2 different types of new building. So you have these brown office towers, and they also change how your parks and also your factories score, because the office towers count for adjacency on the parks in the same way your tower blocks did. And also your office buildings will give you more points next to your factories than either the shops or the harbours did. Also, of course, they have their own way of scoring, which is a little complicated. Much as with the tower blocks, it's important how high they are. So let's take an example with a few office towers in. I'm not going to put the resources on, but we'll assume all of these office buildings are powered. Now, as with the tower blocks, you only have to power the one that's visible on the top. So the way these score is first you need to determine how many tower blocks are connected. So here we have no adjacent tower blocks. So here we just have a stack of 2 on its own. So that would be a single tower block. We would then go along to see how many tiles are in that stack, and that would tell us how many points that position of tiles is worth. So 2 on their own stacked up is worth 1 point. So you can see a single tower block on its own is worth no points. But we also have these 4 connected here. So we would look down this line until we see the row with 4 tower blocks. And you can see they don't have to be in a straight line, they just have to be adjacent. And not all adjacent just to each other, but connected by adjacency. So even like this, we still have adjacency there. So what we would do is we have 1 on its own. So we'd follow the line for 4 till we find 1 tile. And that would tell us that that single stack in this connected block of 4 office buildings is worth 3 points. Next to that, we have 1 with 2 high, which is worth 7 points. We then have another 2 high, so that would be another 7 points, and then another single high, which would be 3 points. The final type of building is these monuments here. And these score based on what buildings are adjacent to them. They don't give you anything and they don't require anything to power them. But they could potentially, depending on what you put them next to, give you negative points. So if you put them next to a factory or a harbour, you get -5 points. Each monument, office tower or tower block adjacent to a monument is worth 0 points. Each public office next to a monument will get you 2 points. Each shop, 3 points. And a park next to a monument will get you 5 points. So a monument with 4 parks around it would get you 20 points. And that is everything you need to play the game. In the game, there is also, however, a mini expansion, which is the Playgrounds expansion. And that's just these 5 tiles that are playgrounds. These will replace some of your parks, and rather than eating up some of your energy, they'll give you occupants instead. And that is how you play Quadropolis. I do hope that you've enjoyed this video. Of course, if you have, please do check out the rest of the videos on the channel, subscribe to the channel, and share the channel with your friends and family, as well as checking us out on social media. You can find us on Facebook and on Twitter. And as always, thanks for watching, and bye for now.